We're back to the Brown book now. We're going to talk about developmental stages of the learner. We'll start from the young child and move our way up. Infancy, you can't really do much teaching. At that point, you have to focus on teaching parents or caregivers. So for that teaching, you would refer back to the adult learning that we'll talk about at the end of this presentation. But as children get older, there are certain aspects of their development that come into play, and you have to understand these bits and pieces of their development so that you can create the correct learning environment for them. As they get older, closer to being a toddler, children develop object permanence. And before that, if you show them an object and then they don't see it again, they'll think it's gone, out of sight, out of mind. Whereas once they hit the object permanence stage, then they will realize that just because they don't see their favorite stuffed animal doesn't mean it went away. It's just not in the room, and they'll begin looking for things. They'll also start grasping cause and effect, and they'll start figuring out if I do X, then Y happens. And that can be very useful when you try to teach them later. They have very little long-term memory, and they also don't really have the ability to anticipate the future. So you have to work on concrete skills that are very easily repeated, very repetitive skills. You can give them simple directions. They need to be 1 or 2 step directions, and just know the older they get, the more steps you can add. That's actually one of the ways of determining sort of a child's IQ. If they're too young to take a standard IQ test, there are a lot of different things you could do. Give them manipulatives, but you could give them like a blue cube, a red circle, a green triangle, and then say things like, put the triangle on top of the block, or put the green one on top of the blue one, and then put the red one in between. You can give them multiple directions, and the more steps they can follow, the more understanding and comprehension they have. And so you can sort of estimate their IQ from that. They tend to trust their immediate caregivers, the people that they see all the time. They trust those people infinitely, unless those people are abusive to them. So it makes it pretty easy to spot an abusive situation. And of course, in that case, you have the legal obligation to do something about that. But outside of that, assuming that there's nothing out of the ordinary, they will trust those people implicitly. So taking the child away from the caregiver in that case will cause anxiety, and the child won't be able to learn what you're trying to teach them. It's better keeping them all together in the same room. During toddlerhood, the best thing to do is make sure, again, you have the parents in the room with the child, that you don't overwhelm the child. If they have a favorite doll, incorporate that into your teaching strategy. One of my favorite things to do was to, if a kid brought in their stuffed animal, was to give that, just take off an extra pediatric mask, set up a treatment, and give their stuffed animal an SVN treatment. Of course, there's now the SVNs that have the built-in teddy bear. They're pretty expensive, so some hospitals have them and others don't. But those things are less frightening, and children are more apt to tolerate it well. If you need to do long-term teaching, this is particularly important if you have a child with some chronic condition, cystic fibrosis, for example, then you should go to the child. You should go to that child's environment and not expect them to learn outside of their own environment. And do remember that they have short attention spans. So the best thing to do is to give them routines and keep doing the same thing over and over. Tell the parents, kid has cystic fibrosis, do the CPT at the same time every day, in the same order every night. So for example, you do the CPT, you suction the kids, you take a bath, then you take your nighttime medications, and you have to do it the same order every time. And that will make a big difference. They'll come to anticipate that, and they'll be much more settled, and they'll be more obliging too. If you can involve their friends, they don't have a lot of friends at this age, but that sometimes helps long term if their friends can get involved. Or if they have friends that have the same disease condition, the buddy system works. I really just have to focus on repetition at this age until they get older. Early childhood, which would be up to about the age of 5, is when they start being a little bit more fun, and they're a little bit easier to teach. They tend to have an inability in some cases to separate reality from fiction. This is where they have imaginary friends, is where the imaginary friends show up, and they will have full conversations with themselves or with their toys, and that's perfectly normal. This is the stage where they ask why. For the record, you can't ever actually answer that question. They'll just ask why again. They tend to magically think. They have magical thinking, meaning they'll say things like, "I'm going to fly home tonight," and in their mind, they probably really are flying. But you can't correct that. It's actually normal, and you should encourage that to the extent that by the time they're in kindergarten, hopefully they will have their feet on the ground a little more firmly. They will listen to stories, and because they like this magical thinking and they like to hear, they like a whole background, they learn really well if you teach them in a story type fashion. So remember, with these kids, they have short attention spans. They can really only learn one thing at a time. They don't have the ability to do more than one thing or really understand it. If you can make their session interactive somehow, it's great if you can do the story, but maybe have puppets, have them role play. And also with the parents, you have to, or their caregivers, those people need to model the behavior that you want the child to show you. As children get older, into sort of the preteen age, the early school years, then they become easier to teach. But in other ways, actually, this is probably like the easiest age to deal with them. They're old enough where they're not frightened by things, or if they are, it's logical. I mean, if you come at them with a needle, they know it's going to hurt. But you can talk to them. They have logical rationale, so you can say, "Hey, I know this is going to hurt, but in the end will make you feel better." So you can sort of talk them into things. And they understand that even if things change in appearance or shape or whatever, that they are still normal. So for example, if you had an MDI with a younger child, and it was a certain brand and it always was the same color, and all of a sudden it's a different brand and therefore a different color, the little kids, the little 2 and 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, they might get really freaked out about that. It's not my medicine, it doesn't look right. The elder kid, if they notice that it's different, they'll understand logically. You just say, "Hey, it's a different kind, it's the same medicine," and they're usually okay. So honestly, this is the most fun to deal with. One of the things I'll keep coming back to now from here on out is autonomy. Letting them take responsibility for as much of their learning as possible will go a long way. Anything you can allow them to help you with, putting together the nebulizer, for example, will be helpful long term. At this age, kids like interactive things. The current generation, if you've got an iPad or a video game of some sort, this is the age to crack that out. And they just like to help. You can give them analogies, though, that you couldn't give with younger kids. So you can say the nebulizer, it's like smoke that'll make you feel better. You can give them an analogy. And they do respond really well to just simple praise and rewards. You have to keep reinforcing their learning and their behavior, but when they do something correctly and you say, "Hey, good job," it goes a long way. This is probably one of the hardest groups to deal with because you have sort of the best of the adult qualities in a learner coupled with the worst of the toddler behaviors all rolled into one. As far as Piaget is concerned, at this point in development, they have reached the formal operations stage. So they're thinking pretty concretely, and you don't have to worry about that. They have the ability to think abstractly and logically, and they can understand really complex things. You can use scientific jargon, presuming that you have explained to them any words that they're not familiar with, but they are smart enough to know what they don't know, and they'll ask if they need to, unless they're being defiant or oppositional, which of course is one of those toddler things that they do. And of course, we all know that teenagers are all invincible. You can't break them. They're going to live forever, and all the rest of us are stupid. So, you know what? It's hit or miss. You might get a kid who's really wonderful, who wants to listen and learn, and they're just a treat to deal with. And then you might get a sullen, angry, really nasty kid. There's some sort of nothing in between with this age group. Now, on the upside, kids are usually really worse to their parents than they are to other people, so hopefully they'll be nice to you even if they don't listen to you or pay any attention to what you're telling them. At least they'll fake it. And then they have egocentrism. We got a bad case of it here. They're obsessed with what they think, and what they think everybody else thinks what they think, and that everybody else is thinking about them. The whole world revolves around them, and no one else is important, and no one else understands, and no one else knows anything. So it's a little vicious cycle. Well, the way you teach them really is dependent on them. Some of the kids will get really embarrassed, and so one-on-one teaching will go much further. And if they start getting oppositional, you can say to them outright, hey, look, I can teach you this one-on-one, or I can put you in a group setting with a whole bunch of other kids. You make the choice. Again, we go back to autonomy. But when you give them that choice, they'll go one way or the other. There's not going to be any in between. Some of them do learn better in peer groups, and it's not a bad idea to put them in a peer group and have like a group meeting, because if nothing else, they'll have someone to talk to who will sort of understand them, another teenager, and that helps. Make sure that you don't patronize them and use non-medical jargon. Tell them like it is. Long term, just know they're going to change a lot between the ages of 12 and 19. Some kids get pretty weird during this time, and if you see them when they're 12 and they're fine, and then you see them when they're 16 and they're suddenly pierced and tattooed and whatever, just you just kind of have to go with it. Pointing out that they are different at that point will usually just make them more defiant. Just expect that. You expect them to be defiant and know that they're irritable. They also have all these hormonal issues, and so medications and treatments that used to work may change really suddenly. They also are less likely to be compliant with their medications. So, you'll often see kids come into the unit and suddenly be, you may not have seen them for a couple of months, but suddenly they're on a ventilator or something because they're using their medications, but between the hormones and the changes and the dietary habit changes, things like that, they may not be doing well. And remind them not to share their medications with anyone. There are certain principles of adult learning in general. This is pretty basic, and you can read through this on your own, but most of it's pretty self-explanatory, and none of it should shock you in any way. Adult education, just for the record, is called andragogy, as opposed to pedagogy, which is teaching children. We can assume with adult learners that they are independent, that they will educate themselves if they really want to know something, and generally they're ready to accept the information you give them. They would rather have information given to them and just move on. They've got other things to do, they're busy, and they'll respect you not taking up any more time than necessary. Again, Don't take up a bunch of their time when you teach them. Give them self-teaching ideas. By that I mean tell them good websites to go to. If there's some interactive video or something to watch, give them that information. Make sure that they have your contact info, so if they want to call you or ask any questions, they can get a hold of you. And you really just have to assume that they understand. You give them minimal information, ask them if they need any more, and then after that, they're old enough to be responsible for what goes on. Long term, just have a lot of follow-up visits or, regularly scheduled follow-ups to make sure that they're doing everything correctly and that they recognize when they have changes in their conditions. And this stage goes on for about 20 to 30 years and possibly longer depending on the patient. In young adulthood, this is where they're like go, 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 busy, busy, busy. They're just getting their careers off the ground. They're just getting married. They're just starting families. They really want you to be as quick and painless as possible. They just want the information and they want to get on with their life. If anything significant happens to them, they find out they have a disease or something, it's probably the most devastating time in their life for them to get bad news. Because they really are at a point where they are in control of their own life for really the first time, and they're looking forward to the future. So it can be pretty difficult. If you have to give bad news to someone, or if a patient who's just gotten bad news, finding someone else who has already walked the walk and putting the two of them in touch can make a huge difference. Here's where you are on the learning scale. You're able to see the bigger picture, but at the same time you realize that you're sort of in the middle. You recognize that a good portion of your life is already gone. Sorry, it's a bummer, I know. But that there's still more to come, and that you're going to do okay. This is also, you see, it's a huge gap here. It's 40-year age range, but in the middle of this is when people begin to realize that there's mortality. They start to worry about long-term planning, and they worry about their family and their community. So these people can be really good allies in helping you teach younger people, and sometimes that gives them a good purpose in life. So if they have, especially if they have a chronic illness and they're really feeling bad about themselves, you can sort of hook them up with a younger person and say, tell that younger person, tell them why life is still good and worth living. And sometimes you make some inroads with them. Older adults, age 65 and older, fall into the category where their education is called geragogy, as opposed to andragogy or pedagogy. And you can go a lot of different ways with these people, because there's 65, 70, 75, and sharp, like Betty White, who might be a little dingy, but she's got her act together. She knows where she is all the time, and she's not confused. Or even in the early 60s, you can see early onset dementia or Alzheimer's, in which case you certainly have to adapt your teaching. In those cases where you know that they have some degenerative brain condition, you definitely need to get a caregiver involved and train the caregiver, as opposed to spending a lot of extra time with this adult. Not saying don't teach them, but certainly keep in mind what they need. They have a great vision. They really understand things. They have a great wisdom. So it often, if they're with the program, it doesn't take you nearly as long to teach them as it does even somebody in middle age. You can just say, boom, this is how you do it, and they go, okay. Because they've been around the block so many times. It's hard to show them anything new. There's just very little they haven't already seen. They do often suffer from chronic conditions, sometimes more than one. And they also are sensitive to ageism. So be respectful and kind to them, and don't be patronizing. There are a lot of different teaching strategies, and you can use sensory perception, and you can deal with people's memories and what motivates them. and decide how willing they are to try something new. That's the cautiousness and risk-taking comes in to play when you have like a new medication or a new treatment of some sort. You'll learn about that person and see how willing they are to try something new. Sometimes when they get desperate, they will. And so you just, work with what you've got. They will change during the course of their life and be, at some points in their life, easier to teach and other points harder to teach. But in the end, as long as you, again, allow for autonomy, there's no way to tell you that that's so important. I just have to keep emphasizing it. Let them have autonomy. Let them help determine what they want to learn, how they want to learn it, when they want to learn it. Give them plenty of opportunity to sort of digest the information you've given them. Have a pause, a rest period is how your book states it, and then have them come back to be sure that they learned what you wanted them to learn, and pace things appropriately. The people who are in their 20s and 30s, they can take information in a lot quicker than 40s. But once you get into the 60s and 70s, depending on the style of the information you're presenting, if it's a computer-based instruction, then you have to make sure they can use the computer, things like that. Then you just adjust it as needed. And last but not least, the family is always the key. And by family, I also mean caregivers. Most people do not live in a vacuum. But I'm going to give you something to do here. If you have some time to kill, go to YouTube and look for Gary Darwin's house. He's a magician here in town. I got to go to his house recently. He calls it a museum. To be honest, the guy's a hoarder. But he hoards magic stuff. He's got an amazing amount of magic history in his house. So on the one hand, it's really amazing. And there's a magician that walked through his house and made a YouTube video. It's about 25 minutes long. But on the other hand, the healthcare worker in me was wandering through this house in dismay because Gary Darwin, who's apparently an amazing magician in his own right, is 70 years old. He's diabetic. He's now an amputee. He's gained quite a bit of weight, and because he has so much stuff in his house, he can't move around in his home anymore because he has narrow walkways because of all the stuff. He certainly can't clean his home. He doesn't really have a good support system, but boy, does he have a lot of stuff. So take all this into account and know that everybody has a different path they follow in life, and the best you can do is figure out where somebody is on that path and create an educational experience for that patient at that point in time. And what you do for them today may not be what you would do for them tomorrow or what you would have done for them yesterday. Thank you.